Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Scots Whay Hae podcast. And today we're once again in collaboration with the Bloody Scotland Book Festival to talk to the 5 shortlisted authors for this year's McIlvanney Prize, which is for the Scottish Crime Book of the Year. And they are Tariq Ashkanani for The Midnight King. Hello, Tariq.
Hello.
Liam McIlvanney for The Good Father. Hi, Liam.
Hi, Alistair.
Callum McSorley for Paperboy. Hi, Callum.
Hiya.
Denise Mina for The Good Liar. Hello, Denise.
Hello there.
And Sir Ian Rankin for Midnight in Blue. Hi, Ian.
Hello.
So, first of all, if you don't mind, I'd like to get a synopsis of each novel for listeners. And starting with yourself, Tariq, tell us about The Midnight King.
Sure. So, The Midnight King is a kind of dark and horrible serial killer thriller where a man who grew up with knowing his father was a serial murderer of young children. He comes back home to his hometown of Nashville when his dad commits suicide, and he's going through his father's things, and he comes across a box of trinkets from dead children, and he realizes that one child is still out there, just taken a few days earlier, and might still be alive. And he kind of goes on the hunt to try and see if he can find her, and that's where the story kind of takes off.
Wow, that sounds incredible. That one. It's a light start for this.
That's right, yeah. The comedy, yeah.
The comedy. Liam, yourself, can you tell us about The Good Father?
Yes, Good Father is a psychological thriller set in the idyllic seaside village of Fairley, just outside Largs. And it's about a couple, Gordon and Sarah Rutherford, whose 7-year-old son goes missing from the beach in front of their house. And I suppose it's a kind of emotional deep dive into the repercussions and aftermath of that traumatic incident.
And I'm always worried especially when I'm talking to crime writers, that, there's that do not spoil anything in the background going on when you're giving your synopsis. Callum, can you tell us about Paperboy?
So yeah, Paperboy is about a guy called Chuck who works in confidential waste destruction. So he drives about in his van destroying confidential material, but he's also in a lot of debt to some really sketchy people. So he starts to pass information in return for leniency, essentially, and ends up kind of over his head in the criminal underworld.
And yeah, so many questions to ask you about the confidential waste business. That sounds fascinating anyway. Denise, can you tell us about The Good Liar?
It's about a forensic scientist who realizes quite late on that her discipline is bullshit, and she has to decide whether, and a lot of people have been convicted, and one in particular has been convicted, and she has to decide whether or not she's going to stand up and tell the truth in front of all of her contemporaries, and or just take a pension and have a nice life.
And Ian, could you tell us about Midnight in Blue, please?
Ex-cop put in jail for murder, surrounded by people who hate his guts because he's an ex-cop. But when there's a locked cell mystery, when a murder happens at dead of night in a locked cell, he's the person best placed to solve it. Who are you going to call? John Rebus.
I have a feeling you've done that before. It's really interesting to have you on as a group, because you're all in kind of different stages of your writing careers and in terms of publications as well. Tariq, I wanted to start with you, and just to be clear, you've got the writer, but his father's the serial killer. Is that right?
That's right. So his father is, so Lucas Cole is the dad, and he is the writer who is the serial killer, and Nathan Cole is the son who's come back home to Nashville for the funeral. So the book starts with the father already dead and the son just coming home to deal with the funeral and the estate, etc. And that's when the kind of story starts. So I did kind of want to have that, rather than dealing with the aftermath of a serial killer and the kind of the mess that they leave behind, and the victims and all that, and ask that question, I suppose, who is the victim of a serial killer? Is it only the murdered people, or is it the people who are still alive, the family members, etc., who are left kind of grapple with all this afterwards?
It did make me wonder if the kind of logical next step for a crime writer is to commit crime. Have you thought that, this is a
I'm a method writer, so I killed several people when writing this book just to really kind of get in the mindset of it. Yeah,
deep research was
exactly. Yeah, we're not
uh,
recording, are we?
remember I said you can cut anything out that you really want
That's fine.
taken out for purposes. And Liam, the central character in your book, can we say it's really close to yourself in terms of nearly everything, really? And I was wondering what was that challenging? Was it cathartic?
No, it was a warm bath, really. I'd spent a couple of novels writing about a gay Highland detective in sort of 1960s and 1970s Glasgow, which is fairly distant from my own experience. So this guy, Gordon Rutherford, is a middle-aged Scottish Scotlit academic. And it was actually quite nice. Instead of having to keep phoning mainly my ex-cop cousin, as I do with the police procedurals, to try and make sure that I'm not making dreadful errors with the procedural stuff, it was quite nice just to be able to rely on my own experience. The guy's doing a job that I've done for 28 years and should hopefully know a couple of things about. So that was actually great fun.
But writing so closely about yourself, did other people who you know and perhaps in the family or whatever think, is that me? Was there some of that?
Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, there's a sister-in-law, let's say, that features in the book. So that was the subject of some speculation among the wider family. Yes.
And Callum, approaching a second novel in a series, particularly after the first one has been so critically acclaimed. I mean, how did you approach it? What was your way of going at it?
Um, it's tricky because I think my instinct, if you do like the tricky second album, you can either do something that's wildly different, take a big swing, and if it fails, you've kind of shot for the moon. Or you can do the sequel where you're kind of limited by certain things, character, style, tone, setting. And so kind of being on that path it was difficult because I was trying to work out how to write something that felt as fresh as the first one while using a lot of things from the first one. It's tricky.
And did you get advice? I mean, you're on a kind of panel here who may have be perfect to ask advice for, I don't know. But did you get advice from other writers?
I did once ask Ian a couple of years ago at Crawberty Festival about how best to keep a series fresh continuing. So I did have something stored away there.
And Denise, central to yours seems to be guilt, the idea about and how you deal with guilt. Is it digging into the kind of darker emotions something that, is really interesting to you?
Well, I mean, I think, as someone who studied law, has a lot of family and friends who are lawyers, I think the notion of guilt is really interesting and who is liable. And you do notice that the people who go to prison are working class, you know? I mean, the justice system is not neutral. And when you start to actually unpack notions of guilt and safety and the fact that science changes all the time, people are in prison for cannabis. There's folk in the States with life sentences for hash, and there's now shops selling hash. We should be, but law presents itself as an absolute value. And I think it's really interesting to unpack that. I think it's really discombobulating, and I quite like that.
And also this idea of specifically a blood spatter expert, is that the job of...
She's a blood spatter expert who has devised a really complex algorithm for working out, recreating crime scenes. And I think, every generation has a science that they think is unassailable. DNA is quite problematic and always has been. But every generation has a science that they want to defer to make these decisions because they're very uncomfortable decisions about who's guilty and who's not guilty. And then every generation has its outrages when we suddenly realise that that's absolute crap. And, we need to look at it. But with blood spatter, that was one that over the course of 20 years, I mean, I studied forensic science at university, and almost every science that I studied is now regarded as absolute bullshit.
That's interesting.
It was like blood spatter, forensic odontology, even fingerprints after Shirley McKee. They're not reliable, these things. They are being filtered through interpretation of experts. So, I think that there is the thing is that the criminal justice system is a fiction. People talk down to us because we write crime fiction, but the criminal justice system is a narrative construction of responsibility and a lack of response and mitigation. And I just think it's dead interesting to unpack that. But it's set in London because they privatised all their forensic services in quite a sneaky way about 12 years ago. And no one ever talks about it. And it's now controlled by about 3 companies, all of which I think are offshore. So if that isn't sinister, I don't know what the fuck is sinister. You know what I mean?
When you say they, you mean the City of London?
No, England and Wales privatised all the forensic services.
Right.
Because it was bigger, better, faster to have them privatised. And they were a lot of different companies. All the forensic scientists in Scotland flooded down there because they were getting paid massive amounts compared to up here. And now they're all coming back because they're getting paid nothing because the market has kind of sunk to the bottom. There were lots and lots of companies doing lots of different tests. They were all bought out by other companies. So there's like 3 companies doing all the forensic testing in the whole of England and Wales. And I think most of them are registered in Jersey.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Ian, I believe this is the 25th Rebus novel, is that right?
Probably.
So how did you approach it? The same as the previous 24, or are there changes along the way?
Well, can I start by saying on behalf of Tariq and I that we are humbled to be amongst 3 previous winners of the McIlvanney Prize. Us young uns are looking for all the help we can get in our careers. So we're very thankful to be on this panel today. It was different. It was a different book because normally I've got the whole of Edinburgh at my disposal. And here I was putting Rebus in a very confined space where there's only so much he can do. He's only got access to so many instruments that will be helpful to him or information that will be helpful to him. He's got to play a very careful game of trying to make friends amongst a community who hate his guts because he's an ex-cop. So all of that was difficult. Making it a real prison, I thought it can't be a fictional prison. It's got to be the real prison in Edinburgh. But things will be happening in it that haven't necessarily happened in real life. So you're kind of walking on moral eggshells. You don't want to annoy too many cons or screws, as I was told not to call them. But I got help. I mean, the departing governor was terrific, mostly because he was departing, I think. And I made friends with a librarian who's an Edinburgh City Council librarian. So I went in and talked to the prisoners about creative writing and literacy. It was a fascinating experience. And I mean, as Denise has already alluded to, I mean, a lot of the people you're going to find in prison are working class, lower echelons, damaged, illiterate, etc., etc. And prison actually gives them a structure to their life. And when they get out of jail, they find it very difficult to do anything except go back into jail. And especially these days when training has been cut back, there's no money for training, etc., etc. So they spend longer in their cell, less time getting skills, even basic skills, which would give them some chance to work when they get out. One of the jobs they do get trained for, though, is cleaning up in hospitals. And I mean, that's a fascinating process in itself, that a lot of the people that are doing the cleaning of the most, the ickiest substances in hospitals and getting rid of all that stuff are ex-cons. So all human life is there. It was a microcosm for society as a whole. There are echelons, there are people at the top and people at the bottom. There's an economy, there's drugs, of course, there are all kinds of social problems inside jails. And there's Rebus, who has been on one side of this debate throughout his life, thinking anybody in a jail must be scum. And now he's in jail surrounded by these people and finding out actually it's more nuanced and 3-dimensional than he thought.
And in terms of research, if you have spoken about that, but Ian, how far do you go with the research? You say there are certain things certain people that you don't want to annoy, but do you push it as far as you can?
Yeah, well, I mean, without real people being able to spot themselves in the story, you take it as far as you can. So, for example, I had prison officers being threatened and having their car set on fire. Well, we've just had cases reported in the media about that and trials taking place about that. I mean, that stuff just goes on, but you don't want to name names and you don't want to make sure people can go, oh, hang on a minute, that's me. Or that's my criminal pals in the gang fraternities of Scotland. Because otherwise you'd be Daniels in the lion's den, and I don't want to. Yes, thank you, Denise. I don't want to go there. So yeah, you've got to be careful. But I got help, but always realizing that this is a fictionalized version of reality, and stuff will be happening in my stories. The potential for it to happen in the real world is there, but it might not necessarily have happened, and it might never necessarily happen.
Mm-hmm. And Callum, you mentioned the waste management. Did you have to go into research that and get aspects? Was that important to get those kind of things right?
So this kind of came from a friend of mine who does that for a living. He works for quite a big company that shreds confidential stuff. They have contracts with NHS and various other big organisations. He told me this thing once about how nobody wants the police contract because the vans keep going on fire. There's something really weird about it. But so nobody actually wants that contract. But yeah, they do things like that. And so he did take me to the warehouse and show me their machinery and their vans and everything. And just bits and pieces of things he would tell me over, like he's been doing this for years, and he would just tell me little things about his day. And I'd always been thinking there's a kind of story in there somewhere. And when it came to writing the sequel, I thought this is the time to do it. It fits perfectly with the first book and the kind of idea I had for the series going forward.
And just to touch upon what Ian said there, is it important that, you might have these stories told to you and they're great stories and I want to include them, but you don't want people, again, to recognize themselves or end up in court or something?
Yeah, there was a couple of specific jobs that my friend did that really kind of sparked my imagination. I did want to use them, but I had to kind of heavily cover that because they obviously involve real people, and including him. That's he works in with confidential stuff, so he can't really be seen to be spouting things to writers and whoever all else.
And Tariq, how do you even begin to decide to research the subjects of your novel? Where do you begin?
I knew I wanted to write a dark story, and I think for me, I think horror and crime are kind of two sides of the same coin almost. And I think for me, I love the kind of the horror adjacent type dark crime stories, and so I knew I wanted to go down that path. And I suppose started asking myself the question of what do I find scary, and what would scare me, and I think that changes as you get older. And for me, in between books two and three, my last book and this book, I'd had kids, and I think that was a new dimension of, I suppose, a new fear was unlocked in terms of what would something happen to them. And so that seemed like a kind of logical place to start. Well, let's do something about a man who does horrible things to kids. And then I knew I wanted to set it in a real city. And I knew Nashville is one of my favorite places in the entire world. I've been there a few times, so I kind of knew it. And it's just this amazing place of like it's vibrant, there's music, there's just food, and everyone's so friendly and nice, and you can walk everywhere. And I was like, this would be a wonderful place to write a really horrible, dark, miserable story. And the more research Nashville, the more I was like, actually, it fits the story perfectly because it's quite small city. The center is quite small. You can kind of walk everywhere. There's a death row prison 20 minutes outside of the city where a big part of the story takes place, but man in death row for the crimes he's been put in prison for. Did he do it or not, etc. So that's all that it kind of just fit the story perfectly. And I thought it's quite nice to have that kind of nice, bright exterior city. Everyone's very friendly and vibrant and joyous, and then at the same time have this really dark, claustrophobic, isolating story running through it. The kind of, I thought they're quite nice, kind of opposite stuff fusion together there.
It's, I've spoken to a few crime writers over the years that say, well, I've now got kids and I'm going to write something really dark about what happens to kids.
Yeah, I know. It's horrible. I guess like therapy almost. Like I genuinely think crime writers are the nicest folk ever. Like the crime writers that I've met are just super nice, and I think a lot of it is because you get all that horrible stuff out your system and you put it on the page, and I think it's the romantic and the kids authors you want to watch out for because they're the ones to keep it all bottled up inside. So they get rid of all the happy stuff. They've got nothing left.
Watch out for the romantics. I like that. I like. And Denise, I thought when I heard what the kind of subject of yours was, that the research for this, did you enjoy getting stuck right into that world? You maybe already had a foot in it previously, but returning there perhaps.
Well, being very diligent, I had to watch every true crime documentary, no matter how shabbily made or tangentially useful. Yeah, so I mean, it was that sort of thing, but there's actually very little available about blood spatter. Like the book you can get is kind of a self-published, sort of photocopied. It looks like a fanzine. That's like the textbook on it. And I mean, the research essentially was reading legislation, which I think is my special power. If you've done a law degree, you can read the most boring things in the world. Tariq will affirm this. You can actually read your way. You can drag your eye across lines that other human beings simply couldn't get through. So it's like reading legislation, and you're like, wait a minute. The prosecution, the police basically say we want to look at the forensics for this guy, or we want to look at all the forensics because there might be somebody else, and that decision gets made well before the case comes to court. That's really important. That's really sinister. If you can use that narratively, you can use it as a really kind of sinister beat point. And all the lawyers that I've spoken to who use this stuff all the time, they're kind of like, oh, actually, yeah, that is really sinister. You know what I mean? So I mean, being quite detail focused, that kind of really helped it. And also just kind of trying to work out the structure of it, because it's somebody who's giving an address to their contemporaries. And, really, we're all sitting here, right? What we all want in later life is the respect of our peer group and financial security, and for your kids to be financially secure. What would it take for us all to blow it up? Because when I was young, I was a revolutionary. And now I'm old. I just want everyone to shut the fuck up and stop talking about their feelings. If you're not there already, guys, it'll come to you. Do you know what I mean? I'm so damaged. But what would it take for you to actually take a revolutionary action and change things, And so she's walking towards this podium, and she has to decide whether or not she's going to tell the truth, and she faces all because the waters are mined around you as you get older, And it's like, don't shake the boat. And, why aren't we all talking about young guys in prison for cannabis 20 years ago? Why are we not talking about that? Why are we not talking about the fact that lots of people own 20 Airbnbs and young folk can't get houses? Why aren't we all just being honest about it? Because we don't want to shake the boat, and we do want to get invited to that dinner party, and we know cops who put them away. And do you know what I mean? Yeah, anyway, being an awkward bugger is probably the greatest tool that I have.
Right. And Liam, you've said that you didn't really have to research your character in The Good Father, but there are other aspects that you would have to research, and again, uncomfortable ones too.
Well, maybe stupidly, I didn't really do much research for the book, so the kind of missing child element, that was just sort of internal research. How would you feel
Right.
if
Okay.
this happened to you? And again, I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I think sometimes when you're writing police procedurals, or when I'm writing police procedurals, the research can be a bit of a crutch. You go away and you do all this research and you kind of build your narrative around it. But I like the sort of nakedness, if you like, of just not doing that research and saying, how would this hit you? What would you do? What could you find yourself capable of? How would it affect how you view the world? How would it affect your relationships with other people, those close to you? How would it change your standing in the community that you live in? So just all that stuff. So I didn't really, I suppose things like, the Madeleine McCann case and other cases would have been in the air and would doubtless have influenced my thinking about it. But it was mainly just that internal research that drove the book.
And so actually, you consciously stayed away from kind of researching other cases because you wanted it to be as personal as possible.
Yeah, I think I got the idea, and it just sort of took off. I didn't want to sort of cool things down by going off and doing a lot of research. It was a book that I just wanted to write. In fact, I was 10,000 words into another Duncan McCormick book, and I got the idea for this book, and I just set that aside and wrote it by my standards quite quickly. It's not by anyone else in the panel standards, but I wrote it quite quickly by my standards, which I was quite pleased about.
And I'm interested how maybe crime writing has changed over, as I say, that people have careers of different lengths. Ian, probably the best place to start with yourself. 25th John Rebus book. Has, in your experience, crime writing, particularly Scottish crime writing, changed over that period?
Well, I mean, how long have you got? I mean, the simple answer is yes, of course. When I started in this business 38 years ago, I think the first Rebus novel was published, before half of you were born. Crime writing wasn't sexy. It was in a dusty shelf at the back of the bookshop. There weren't any crime writing festivals. It wasn't taken seriously by academia or by schools or by the literary establishment. There was a kind of handful of British writers, I guess, P.D. James and Ruth Rendell and Reginald Hill, Colin Dexter, that hit the bestseller lists. But it was a particular kind of story that was being told, it seemed to be. It was still enthralled to the Agatha Christie school of polite English society and bloodless crimes that would be solved by intelligent middle class and upper middle class people, not necessarily by working class cops. So a lot of stuff changed. I mean, policing changed over that time as well, of course, but what happened is that better and better writers, I think, got attracted to the crime novel as a way of talking about big questions, big moral questions, about problems in society, while giving people an exciting story so they didn't feel they were being preached at or lectured to. So a lot of younger writers who might have been attracted to the literary novel at one time in their career suddenly saw no detriment to writing crime fiction. And that's been fantastic for the genre, and it's meant that we've got, we get more column inches than we used to, and we've got more festivals than we used to, and we get invited to the literary festivals, which you never used to get invited to. So all of that's been fantastic, but I mean, ridiculously, there's just far too much competition for the likes of me, and we would like a lot of these young writers to go back to writing literary fiction, please, and and also entertainers and TV personalities, please start writing romantasy, because that's where the big bucks are. Go for the TikTok market, buddy. Don't go for the crime market. And leave the professionals, to put some food on the table for our wains.
Denise, what kind of would you agree with that? The kind of changes that you've seen since you've been writing in crime fiction?
Well, when I started, I was always quizzed about whether or not I was a feminist because I had female protagonists. And then I was at the Gothenburg Book Festival, and an interviewer said, "Don't you think it's a bit of a cliche having a female protagonist?" That was like 20 years later. So things have really, really changed. Look at the gender split in this panel, though. I mean, this needs addressed because the McIlvanney routinely doesn't have women on it. And I was the first woman to win, and I won it in the 8th year or something like that. I mean, do you know what I mean? There's still a long way to go, but that's structural. But in terms of the stories that are being told, they're so different. And like Ian says, the big secret question that hangs over every artistic career is, how the fuck are you going to make a living doing this? Because if you do it full time, you get much better. And, music, poetry, all that stuff. And actually, crime fiction was a way that people who didn't come from independent means could make a living doing it, And I think romantasy is going to be the next big thing, and will be seen as a bit of an anachronism. And I'm pleased about that because there are far too many good people milking the cow that we all rely on.
Just to relate to that, and as a quick aside, the band Field Music, I'm a big fan of, have decided they're going to be a Doors covers band as well, and that's where they'll make their music. They've been quite open about that. But they seem to fund the music of Field Music, our original stuff. We are going to sell big places and be the Doors, which exactly is what you're talking about.
Talk about it. Why are we all embarrassed about it? It's really important. People are giving up their jobs to write poetry. That's not a living.
Yeah,
That's not a living. Do you know what I mean? We need to talk about the economics of the arts more, you know?
absolutely right. Yeah. Liam, how have you seen things change over your period as a crime writer?
Um, I suppose as an academic, I tend to maybe take a slightly longer view and think about Scottish crime fiction. I for about 10 years, I taught a course here on Scottish crime fiction that basically started with Walter Scott and
Mm.
Robert Louis Stevenson. And what's actually, basically what I was trying to do was to teach a Scottish literature survey course, kind of masquerading as a crime fiction course. But it was quite amazing to think how many classic Scottish novels are actually crime novels.
Mm.
Not just Stevenson, but John Buchan's 39 Steps, or I would even have the Primal Miss Jean Brodie as a crime novel of sorts. So it became obvious that actually quite a lot of canonical Scottish literary novelists, if you like, were drawing on that kind of long tradition of the Scottish Gothic and that kind of dark strain in Scottish literature. So I think that's always been that's one of the strengths of Scottish crime fiction, that it's been able to draw on that really long tradition back to Hogg and Stevenson and Josephine Tay, Muriel Spark, all these writers. So yeah, I've lived in New Zealand for 20 years, so I don't really have my finger on the pulse of how things are changing day to day on in Scottish crime fiction. But I'm just conscious teaching it that there's a very much longer story to
Yeah.
Scottish crime fiction than people often realise.
That sounds like a separate podcast for us, Liam, to do the history, going back to Sir Walter Scott, definitely. Callum, you're into your second crime novel, but over as a reader as well, have you seen things change? Have you seen it's a world that you wanted to be involved in, as perhaps Ian suggested?
I mean, yeah, I think it wasn't really. I know Ian was kind of alluding to this kind of snobbishness that existed before against it. By the time I went to uni to do writing in English, Louise Welsh was teaching creative writing at Strathclyde. So I think already that kind of change had occurred at that level. So it wasn't really, oh, you can go into literary fiction or you can do one of these genres. That was more like, if you write well, you write well and write what you're interested in. And that was the kind of attitude at that point, which is a good thing. I think crime is still the genre probably that most represents working class lives, which is a good and bad thing because of course you're a lot of the time talking about working class criminals and you don't really want to kind of sort of cover out like a huge number of people with criminality, and align them with that. But at the same time, a lot of other genres don't really show working class people at all, So it's kind of tightrope that you have to walk, I think. So I think that's a kind of, and I think people are much more aware of that when they're writing now than maybe people were in the past. I also like the way the police procedural has changed fundamentally because you can't just do stories where it's like the police are the good guys versus the criminals who are the bad guys anymore because real life has shown again and again that that's just not how things are. You can no longer just write something that is like completely uncritical of the institutions that your characters work within. You kind of have to show the difficulties in doing that.
And Tariq, yourself, as a writer and a reader, have you seen changes in crime fiction, Scottish crime fiction?
Yeah, I suppose I probably agree with a lot of what everyone said, to be honest. Callum, like yourself, this is my third book. The Midnight King's my third book, so I'm quite new still in the scene when it comes to writing crime fiction. And I think what always drew me to wanting to write in that genre and why I've been reading it for years is it is a kind of it's a wonderful genre that is so wide and encompassing that it can take on the characteristics of any other genre at a whim. You can have a crime story that's kind of a little bit sci-fi, that's a little bit fantasy, that's a really dark, there's a comedy, that's cozy. There's so many permutations on it, and there's something for everybody in there. And I feel it's a really wide family, and I think it's also a really good mirror to society, as everyone's kind of said already, really, that it is a perfect way to show the modern struggles that people are going through, and you can find any kind of issue that is current modern day right now. You can write a story that is about that, or you can, you look at historical fiction that's dealing with similar issues that were prevalent at that time, etc. So I think crime as a genre is so wide and it's so malleable. It's a really wonderful sandpit to play in, because you can bring in all these influences from other genres. You can make it super sexy and exciting and fast-paced and bombastic, or you can make it slow and introspective and tackling issues. It's there's so much to play with, and I think the variety on offer is why it's such a genre that is just getting bigger and bigger, more and more popular, and it's probably never going to go away. It's just huge. It's a really nice sandpit to play in.
And I think you're absolutely right there. Certainly, what I've noticed as someone who reads it and then talks to people like yourself is the variety and the cross-genre and the more interesting across the board stories that are being told, which I guess is one of the main things about it. And I was wondering about the festival itself, Bloody Scotland, and perhaps other festivals, the role that they've played in spreading the word, if you like. Ian, I know you're kind of the busiest man in Stirling this year with your involvement with Bloody Scotland. Do you think it's been an important festival itself?
Oh, of course. I mean, dramatically so. It's introduced new writers to new readers. It's flagged up great Scottish writing to the world at large. It's produced some thrilling Scotland wins on the football field against England crime writers, especially when I was the captain. And yeah, I mean, it's growing. I love the fact that it does, it gives a space to new writers, that it allows new writers to come on. And I remember years ago, I was headlining one of the events, and the guy who got up to read for 5 minutes, who hadn't yet been published, was a young man called Graham McRae Burnett, who has since gone on to Booker Prize and glory. And every time I see him, I say, one day I'll be opening for you, buddy. I'll be your fluffer, you won't be my fluffer. So I mean, that's really exciting when it gives a space and a confidence, because at some point you are going to have to get up as a writer. I mean, nobody becomes a writer because they want to be a stand-up comedian. And yet, as part of the job, we've got to be Jekyll and Hyde. We've got to be this secretive person who's locked away in isolation, writing a book, and then become, and then suddenly go out into the world and talk about it confidently on a stage in front of strangers. And that can be a nerve-wracking experience. So it's great for people to get a foot in the door. And it's just a really friendly festival. I think it's the friendliest festival in Scotland.
Yeah. I would agree with you in my experience of going round. Absolutely right. Yeah. Callum, what's your experience been?
Amazing. Yeah, I also have a really special place in my heart for Bloody Scotland. Incredible festival. 2023 was the first time I went, and I've went last year as well. And yeah, great atmosphere. Actually, a huge range of people to see. Attracts authors from overseas as well now, which is amazing. Kind of people that you might never get to see them at any other festival, unless you're willing to go all the way to London or something like that. So yeah, fantastic. Love it.
And Liam, I know you're not going to be there in person this year, but you've been there previously.
Yes, I'm very sad to be missing it. I did a wee book tour in July and into August, but I just couldn't afford the time to stay on for Bloody Scotland, which I was pretty sad about, because it is, as everyone said, a fabulous festival. I think it's partly Stirling too. Stirling seems to be one of the great underrated places in Scotland. Just architecturally, it's phenomenal. And that experience of kind of parading down, I think maybe health and safety has put an end to it this year, but sort of parading down through the medieval streets of Stirling with your flaming torches. I mean, that experience will live with me forever. That was completely unbeatable. And just the collegiality, as Ian says, it can be quite a lonely business writing, and it's fantastic just to be in a festival where you're surrounded by your peers. And that, as a boy, I sort of went along to the Edinburgh Festival, the Edinburgh Book Festival, quite a lot, and you never really saw many crime writers. It was all very heavily literary. So to get festivals that are devoted specifically to the genre has been a great boon, I think.
Yeah. And Tariq, yourself, have you got experience? What do you feel about the festival in general?
I mean, I echo everyone here. It is a fantastic festival, and it punches well above its weight, I think, in terms of the big name that it attracts and how much it's grown over the last 10, 11 years. And certainly from my perspective, I owe so much of my own, success as it is from through the festival. My first book, Welcome to Cooper, came out 2021, I think it was, and I through the festival I got a chance to do the Crime in the Spotlight section where you go up and you read in front of big name authors. It was in front of Ian actually that year. I got to read a section out, and then the year after that I was able to win the debut prize, and now I'm back for the McIlvanney. So it's a really supportive festival. It really does do so much for crime writers, and for me personally, it's been such a wonderful boost in terms of exposure and getting me in front of people and audiences that would never get a chance to otherwise. In terms of as Ian says, pushing books out there from Scottish authors to the wider world, and I think it's a really friendly, welcoming place. Everyone's super nice. It's there's always people hanging out at the bar together. It's a place you go and you go to other festivals, and sometimes they're so big or they're so scattered that you don't really get a feel of any kind of collegiate mixing or anything. Whereas this one, everyone's together in the bar in the Golden Lion, and you can have a pint and you can see big names chatting to small names, chatting to fans of the public, etc. It's a really nice, welcoming atmosphere. It's a wonderful festival.
I think that's it. There's a closeness between writers and readers that's rare.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And Denise, would you echo those sentiments?
I mean, I think what's really interesting about it was set up by writers. So writers, we all know that we are part of a collective endeavor, and we all read each other, and we've all read the same people who, are maybe not no longer with us or not relevant. And, we're all building on each other. And I think, when literary festivals are set up by companies, or I don't know, they sort of want a big name. They want Hillary Clinton to come in a helicopter, whereas we are all in the Golden Lion bar drinking together. And, quite often you're talking to people, you don't know if they're fans or other writers or spotlighted people. So, I mean, I think that's what's really unique about um, festivals that are set up by writers. It does feel like you're part of a collective rather than just a big noise, which none of us feel adequate to. I don't think anybody feels particularly comfortable swanning in and out.
Yeah. Well, I could talk to you for hours, but I think I'm going to say thank you, one and all, for taking the time to talk to me. All the best in terms of the McIlvanney Prize, and have a great Bloody Scotland and whatever else you're going to be doing. Thank you, Tariq Ashkanani, Liam McIlvanney, Callum McSorley, Denise Mina, and Sir Ian Rankin. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Alistair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll be back soon with people who are completely different.